The year is 2007, and a young teenage boy goes to his local video game store looking for something new to play. He spends a little bit of time browsing around, and eventually he finds an interesting-looking game called .hack GU Rebirth. He was vaguely familiar with the name, having seen the occasional episode of .hack sign here and there, but seeing how he didn't know anything else about it, he ended up passing on it in favor of something else. Over the next few months, the teenager would continue going back to that game store, and every time he did, he would find himself checking out that game again. Something about it just calling to him, until eventually he just decided, screw it, let's give it a shot. Then, when he gets home to play it, the young man is shocked. The game is not only good, it's downright fantastic. As a young, diehard fan of anime and JRPGs, it's everything he could have hoped for and more. An incredibly fun action RPG with amazing graphics and a compelling story, all set in a unique world unlike anything else he'd ever seen. And to make things even better, the game turned out to only be episode 1 of a 3-part series. Before he knows it, the young man beats the game and plays it to 100% completion before rushing out to buy the very next episode. And then, a few short months later, he eagerly gets the final one at launch, both of which he also played to completion, and in doing so had become an avid fan of .hack. Hungry for more, the teenage boy sets out to watch all of the different .hack anime. He starts to pick up the various manga spin-offs and novels, and he even manages to track down and play the original 4 .hack games. The franchise just spoke to him in a way that others simply hadn't before, and he just couldn't get enough of it. .hack seemed like this endless well of interesting stories and ideas that could and would go on forever. And so, upon completely catching up on everything, he eagerly awaited with bated breath for the next big installment in his new favorite franchise. And now, 12 years later, I'm still waiting. The franchise I loved all those years ago now seemingly a relic of a different era, and that next big step something that looks like it'll never happen. So I find myself asking, what happened? How did such a big, seemingly invincible multimedia franchise fade into such total obscurity? Well, everyone, that's what I'm here to talk about. So feel free to join me as I sit here getting way too nostalgic over some old cartoons and take a nice long look back at .hack. What we now know as .hack first began life as a game called Great Thief Fortapros, the creative vision of a man by the name of Hiroshi Matsuyama at a then unknown company called Cyberconnect. The idea was the player would assume the role of a thief in a story that would take heavy inspiration from Alice in Wonderland and would feature a large town populated by people controlled by AI. However, upon pitching the idea to the company's publisher Bandai, Matsuyama was rejected, Bandai saying that the game probably wouldn't sell well in its current state. So Matsuyama workshopped the idea and fleshed out the story further, renaming the project to Mooncrow, only for it once again to be rejected. But Matsuyama didn't relent, and as he was reworking the concept for a third time, he became fascinated with the growing popularity of massively multiplayer online video games and began to see the potential for a story there. So now Mooncrow was revamped to include things like hackers and other online elements with a new project name, Treasure Hacker, with the concept finally being accepted and Cyberconnect finally given the green light to start production. It was around this time that one of Matsuyama's colleagues, Daisuke Uchiyama, suggested taking the ideas behind Treasure Hacker and splitting it into multiple stories, which would take it and turn it into what would eventually become Project .hack. The thief angle was all but dropped, with the emphasis now being on telling a story with characters who were playing an MMO game aptly named The World, with the various elements about Matsuyama's concept being reworked by a team of project developers, most notably being Koichi Mashimo, Kazunori Ito, and Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, all of whom were respected talents in the industry. These three, together with Matsuyama and Uchiyama, would go on to be the lead creatives behind the .hack project. What was once a concept for one game had now evolved into 2 different projects that would be released in 2002. An anime called .hack Sign, and a JRPG quadrilogy beginning with .hack Infection. both of which would take place in the same universe and would feature bits of crossover but could safely be enjoyed in isolation. Hack Sign would focus on the story of Tsukasa, a player within the world who awakens one day to find himself trapped and unable to log out, whereas Infection would follow Kite, a young man whose friend fell into a coma while playing the game and his journey to try and bring him back. Critical reception for both of these titles would range from mixed to positive, with the general consensus being that the two were flawed but refreshingly unique products. In terms of sales, though, both of them did pretty well for themselves, with Hack Sign in particular getting a lot of traction thanks to the anime boom of the early 2000s. While Cyberconnect continued to work on the rest of the games, the franchise's success meant that it was able to start expanding. Another anime was released the following year, and spin-off novels and manga began to come out at a pretty steady pace. There was enough content to make sure that even if you had never seen or played Hack, odds were you had at least heard of it, and it was that brand power that helped to create a passionate fanbase. There was nothing else really like it at the time. Hack was surreal and oftentimes very dreamlike, with a mystique to the series that made it different from all of its contemporaries. Nothing else had touched on the nature of an online world quite like it did, and the stories it told went to places games and animes never really had before. Stories dealing with identity, the nature of an online persona, and the strength of the bonds you can forge in a digital space. It was unique, it was refreshing, and it was incredibly successful, with the anime and novels all selling pretty well and the games performing exceptionally, selling almost double what Cyberconnect hoped it would at a total of 1.7 million copies worldwide. Seemingly overnight, Hack had become an obsession for a large group of young fans, and it was so much fun. Every part of the franchise told its own unique story, but they were also fragments of a much grander narrative, with every book, game, or show being another piece to that greater puzzle, and one of the best parts of being a Hack fan during this era was trying to work together with others to piece that puzzle together. The smallest character cameo or line of dialogue could be the basis for endless speculation, and the fact that the franchise was consistently moving forward meant that it was always an ongoing story, with new events always happening both in and out of the world, and beloved characters growing and changing all the time. It was a series that rewarded the dedicated at every turn, but did so without needing to alienate new viewers, and you could see the passion of the developers in everything they did, with Matsuyama in particular even going so far as to create a self-insert in the games. The Hack project hadn't just succeeded, but it had blown all expectations out of the water. For a brand new IP from an unknown company, it was insanely successful, and with a new rabid fanbase hungry for more, it only seemed like the franchise would get bigger. It's unclear exactly what changed in the years that followed, but fans like to point to 2005 as to where it all began. Hack's publisher Bandai had just merged with Namco Limited, and with it came a bunch of corporate restructures, as well as a new, much more restrictive localization process that emphasized bringing over big money-making franchises like Dragon Ball Z and Naruto, with the company now seemingly no longer interested in bringing what they saw as niche properties to the West. Though it wasn't like Hack just vanished from the West overnight, new content was still coming out, but the amount of it was getting smaller and smaller. The next game in the series, Hack Fragment, never got localized, and while we did end up getting the GU games, it was becoming increasingly clear that the series just wasn't a priority anymore. The new games were released without a lot of the perks of their predecessors, and overall had a much smaller marketing push than anything that had come before. And while we did get the Hack Roots anime, it was bafflingly confined to the dead time slots of the early morning, guaranteeing that only the most diehard of fans would ever watch it, and completely defeating the point in the cross-promotion. Still, it wasn't all bad. Like I said, the GU games were all pretty damn good, and despite everything, still ended up selling over 1 million copies. Plus, we were still getting a steady stream of books and manga to sink our teeth into. There was still plenty of content for the fans to go nuts speculating over, but within the community, people were starting to get frustrated. While there was clearly a passionate fanbase still out there salivating for more Hack, Bandai Namco just didn't seem interested in bringing it over. New content was still coming out, but fans in the West had no official way of getting it, and things only got worse once Tokyopop went defunct in 2011 and Bandai Entertainment in 2012. meaning that the companies responsible for bringing the .hack novels and DVDs were gone, and with it, the last bit of new content the fans had left. Things picked up a little bit when Funimation acquired the rights to distribute the franchise in 2013, but by that point, all of the series' momentum had fizzled out. .hack as a thing in the West was just gone. All that remained were memories and a passionate but steadily dwindling fanbase. Which brings me back to the story I told at the start of this video. As great and successful as the GU games were, they were also among the last bits of content to come out in the West. And while it would be easy to blame Bandai Namco for not believing in the franchise, I also can't really fault them. At the end of the day, a company exists to make money, and the unfortunate truth is that .hack was not for everyone. While I've been spending all my time up until now praising the series, the truth is it was always pretty fundamentally flawed, with the games often getting pretty repetitive and almost all of the anime adaptations bogged down by this stilted animation and unbearably slow pacing. And it's a bit sad to admit that. While the stories .hack told were often cerebral and captivating, their presentations often left a lot to be desired. It was only when shows like Sword Art Online took the foundations laid out by .hack and told a much more streamlined story with an emphasis on empowerment and action that the idea really hit the mainstream, which could honestly be a little frustrating, but I also understand. The truth is, .hack was always a little too unique and weird to fully resonate with a broader audience. Its flaws were as much a part of the experience as its strengths, and while they perhaps limited the series, it did also assure that .hack always remained an experience unlike anything else, and that was an experience that meant a lot to a lot of people. In Japan at least, things generally went better for .hack. While it was still considerably downscaled, the series has more or less continued to this day. .hack Link came out for the PSP in 2010. There were a few movies, some mobile games, some books, and merchandise for the series has been pretty consistently coming out. Which is all nice, but it's also a shadow of what .hack once was. And so it seemed like that's just what .hack would be from now on. All but dead in the West, and in the East it would remain as one fandom among many. .hack as the fans had known it was over. The characters they had loved were now a faded memory, and a lot of the unanswered questions looked like they now never would be. E3 2017 was a good show for anyone interested in video games. If you happen to be watching the live streams, then you got to be treated to all sorts of wonderful announcements regarding things like the new God of War or Spider-Man. Though, during Sony's press conference, there was a little something hidden between all the major announcements. Right in the middle of everything came this simple, quiet little trailer, with music so hauntingly familiar that I couldn't help but gasp. There was no way, it was impossible, but there it was, right there. .hack GU Last Recode, a compilation of all 3 GU games to celebrate the franchise's 15th anniversary, promising new graphics, quality of life improvements, and even new content in the form of a brand new 4th episode called Reconnection. To someone who had long since accepted that the franchise was dead, it was mind-blowing. Not only was .hack back, but it was even coming back with new content. Before I even knew it, I had pre-ordered the game, and when my PS4 refused to run it, I traded my console in and got a new one just so I could play it, which was totally reasonable and absolutely worth it. The games were exactly as I remembered them, all the fun, visceral gameplay, and the likable characters, and the intricate world. It was all here like it had never even left. I got to experience Aseo's journey again, and relive those nostalgic days from over a decade ago. Though, while this all was a wonderful treat, like many others, it was this 4th episode that I was most curious about. It wasn't a terribly long story, more an epilogue DLC than a brand new game, but to longtime fans, Reconnection was an absolute delight. It gave us all a chance to see some of our favorite characters again, answer some of our biggest questions, and, for me at least, give a proper chance for closure. Probably the most painful thing about being a Western .hack fan was the fact that we never got any sort of ending. Instead, all we had was a cliffhanger and lots of unanswered questions. And Reconnection felt like something meant to address that. Something that I never thought I'd get, and to be honest, something I didn't realize how much I wanted. Enough that, by the end of it, my eyes were tearing up as I watched that final scene of Haseo and Ovan returning to their friends. And I realized that to a lot of people this scene means absolutely nothing. But trust me when I say it, that this was a very powerful moment for fans. I may have never gotten that next big step in the franchise, but after a decade, I finally got the conclusion to a story that I'd been wanting almost half my life. A story that was such an influence on me that I don't know if I would be who I am today without it. I don't know if .hack will ever really come back, and in a way, I kinda don't care. These days, Cyberconnect is doing just fine for themselves, but Matsuyama has said that they're open to the idea of bringing the franchise back if there's enough interest. And if Last Recode's surprisingly high sales figures are any indication, there's definitely still people interested. So, who knows? If there's one thing I've learned while researching this video, it's that this franchise has an impressive ability to stick around. Though, if anything in this video has made you even a little bit interested in .hack, then I cannot recommend Last Recode enough. Not only is it a package of what's essentially the best part of the franchise, but they're also just damn good games in their own right, and a perfect entry point for people looking to get in. And if you end up liking it, there's a wealth of content out there and plenty of passionate fans who are more than willing to help you sort through it. For me though, the story is finally over. And while some part of me is still hoping we get that next big .hack game, I'm also content enough now to not even really worry about it. But hey, who knows? I thought .hack was dead once and I was proven wrong. Who says it couldn't happen again?